Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this week's session of The Strategic Thinker. I'm here with my colleague, Melissa Thomas, and we're excited to talk about culture today. One of the more popular topics, right, Melissa?
Very true. People always speak about culture and what does it really mean, right?
Absolutely. What they tend to share is that they're usually very committed to it, but there are times that it's working really well and times that it maybe isn't working so well. So I'm gonna share some slides to kind of guide our discussion. And before we dive too deep into our topic around culture today, I just want to remind everyone that each week we have a session of the Strategic Thinker. It's actually an opportunity to support really our main mission and vision of Spark, which is to help dental enterprises grow their value. So we do that by focusing on the things that drive value in dental group practices. And all of those focus areas are actually derived from our dental practice value matrix. And so we have 4 quadrants that we tend to focus on. And like we said, we're going to be talking about culture today. Melissa is always one of my favorite people to talk with because, Melissa, I think you have probably the most unique personality in the fact that you have such good balance in all 4 of these
For an
quadrants.
accountant, you mean? I have a great personality for an accountant.
Right. Yeah, you do have a great personality for an accountant, but you're also uniquely talented. And so I always love it when we get a chance to talk. All right. So today we're going to talk about culture, and we're going to start by really kind of just asking ourselves, do you define your culture or is your culture defined for you? Melissa, what do we mean by this? How have you seen this show up?
Well, it's interesting because it seems like there's always a quote unquote cultural champion, right? And they can be a positive one or a negative one. And it just seems to be that the most influential person, especially in a dental practice, their positivity is infectious and they're influencing, if they're a culture champion. But the reverse is totally true as well. If they're really a negative Nancy, if you will, and really in a bad place, that's so infectious too. And so those influential people are super impactful in helping to infiltrate your culture or define it for you if you haven't defined it.
You're exactly right. I can't probably even count the number of times that we've worked with a practice and they've shared stories about specific team members who are really strong in their contributions, but maybe not always strong in a positive way. To your point, and so we kind of started using a little phrase about how people need to use their powers for good, right? and so sometimes you have team members who are really uniquely skilled at maybe their clinical skills, or they're really fantastic with the patients, but they're not quite as good of a teammate or team member, or they have trouble holding themselves accountable to showing up on time, or being positive in team meetings, and so you get to the point where you have to really question, is their impact more positive than negative? And defining your culture really helps to do that for you. All right. So the way we define our culture is really by starting with our core values. So what do they look like and what don't they look like? Melissa, you and I have talked several times about the stance of not just figuring out what they are, but what they aren't, right? And you have a few really helpful tips and tricks about the process and thinking through these questions. So share a little bit of your experience here.
Sure. So I think that to your point, the what aren't they really helps people solidify in their mind a true example of it, right? Because you can say your core value is fun, and that means you always want to have a positive outlook and you want to have some enjoyment through the day. But it doesn't mean that you're going to sacrifice patient care for a little bit longer of a lunch, right? It doesn't mean you're going to extend your lunch hour in the effort of fun, right? So making sure that people can really draw the line, because I think as human beings, we want some sort of guardrails, right? We don't want to be so confined to this is exactly what you do for every single experience, but knowing a safety guardrail to stay within. So I think that really helpful to know what it is not.
Absolutely. And I've heard you say before, helping people figure out what they can live with and what
Yeah.
they can't live with, right? Because there are certain things that are accepted, as long as they're within your guardrails, to your point. And then there are certain things that are just kind of non-negotiable, right? There are things you can't live with. They wouldn't be accepted. They'd be more destructive than positive. And being able to really articulate those things is important.
And even in the beginning of it, most people's core values are in some way displayed in their website or whatnot. And so I think it's even important when you're bringing on new team members, they know that immediately and what that looks like, because if they can't live with it, maybe they don't need to be interviewing at this place. Or if their values don't completely align, it's not going to be a long haul, employment for them.
Yep, absolutely. And I think usually what happens is that we see practices define their core values, and they're probably in their handbook or maybe on a poster, or if we're really lucky, they show up in things like their website. But they don't take the next step, really, which is defining what the behaviors look like to support those core values. So we have a really pretty simple exercise that we've used multiple times, and that we've encouraged other people to use. And so talk to us a little bit about the flip chart exercise, Melissa, to really help people define their culture.
Sure. Well, in the true vein, I think that this is, Heather, this is your quote ingrained in my mind, is people support what they help create. And so really taking the opportunity to let your team define the values and what they mean. And of course, if you're there to help facilitate, you can guide the conversation in the right way and really help course correct if it's something that, what the value is not, but really helping them understand, having them come up with the ideas, right? That's so much more impactful if you hear it from their mouth. And they're not going to go back on something they said, right? There's some power in, well, you did say that this is what this looks like, right? And hopefully you never have to use that on them. But that's the whole, I think, power in the exercise. And then I think the biggest key there is, once you've really helped define, once the team has felt like they've had a chance to collaborate, and making sure that each member of the team gets to speak. You've always got more vocal team members, but being able to call on each team member to really kind of help understand, what does that value mean to you? Then at the end of the exercise, you can really say, in an effort to really ask for agreement and make sure everybody's aligned, who can't live with these? If you can't live with it, why not? Or, what would you change? And really kind of it's almost their verbal promise to live by those values.
Absolutely. So truly as simple as gathering your team together, using something easy, right? Like a flip chart, clarifying the purpose of your exercise, right? So for your example, writing your core value at the top of the flip chart, and then truly having each person define what that looks like. How would that show up every single day? And so one of our core values is fun, which I love the fact that you picked that one in your example. But I know fun to me looks a little bit different than fun to other people, right? And so I appreciate the opportunity to get that insight and input, because if it was just left up to me, fun might look like a bowling party every 6 weeks, right? And maybe the people on my team would be like, actually what would be fun is if we, had a potluck once a month or whatever it might be. And so I think the exercise not only helps you to define the behaviors that ultimately are going to, help your culture flourish and grow. It's also kind of nice as a leader to get that clarity and insight. It takes some of the pressure off of you to have to figure out what people are looking for and what makes them feel most comfortable. And to your point, what they can't accept as well.
You don't have to come up with all of the ideas, right? There's power in them coming up with those, but as well as you learn something from them, right? You might find out that it seems like every dental practice loves food, right? And so that's always an easy way to invoke some fun. But maybe they really like Mexican food and they don't really like the pizza parties, right? And so really just understanding, those simple things can bring so much morale and boost and really just ingrain that positive culture too.
Yep, absolutely. And I know we used fun because honestly, it's fun, right? But there are things that really start to chip away at teamwork and team effectiveness. So for instance, if one of your core values is integrity, maybe for some people, integrity means showing up on time every single day, not putting your fellow team members in a bind because they're having to, cover for you for the first 5 or 10 minutes. And knowing those kinds of things and how important they are to your team members is really important. I think it helps people to kind of self-manage when they hear from their peers how important certain behaviors are or how detrimental certain behaviors are. I really think it helps to create a culture of accountability as well.
I love that you use the word integrity, because I think so many of those can be defined differently based on how people were brought up. Or I know sometimes I'm guilty of assuming a word means a certain thing, and I'll Google it, right? And make sure, is that the definition? Did I use it correctly? And really helping make sure that everybody knows what it means in that role too. And then you've got all the different the roles in the dental practice. And so being able to hear from what it means at the front desk versus what it means from a clinician versus what it means, to a hygienist, what in their day to day. And it's just important to get all those roles perspective too.
Yep, absolutely. And I love the fact that you commented earlier on, once you have these behaviors defined, it's so much easier to make agreements around them, right? And so if someone then is straying from what's been agreed upon, the conversation gets a little bit easier, right? Because we can say, hey, Heather, I thought we agreed that it was important for all of us to be here on time. And I noticed you've been struggling with that a little bit, right? So it helps you to come back to, the core values and the culture. It helps you when you're having more challenging conversations or when you're making positive decisions as well, whether it's to add more team members or to change hours of operations, whatever it might be. If you have that foundation, decision-making becomes just a little bit easier.
So true.
All right. So probably one last important thing to note is that this is an exercise that should be done more than once, right? So sometimes what happens is the people who are there at the beginning have the opportunity to kind of help define things. But it's not something that lasts forever, right? We have to revisit our values. We have to revisit what our culture looks like and how it lives and breathes each day. And as our team members grow and change, and as we add more team members and additional locations, it's really important to come back to that foundation. And not that your values necessarily change, but the way they show up each day might. And that's really what defines our culture, is the things that happen every single day, and whether or not they're having a positive impact is really probably more within our control than we think. So, all right. So that's this week's tips through the strategic thinker. Hopefully everyone had a few things they could take away and implement with their teams. We'll be back again next week. And in the meantime, if you're looking for some extra insight on Spark, you can go to sparkdentalnetwork.com. So Melissa, thank you so much for joining me today. I always love our time together, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks.